What's up, everyone? This is Mike Casu, and you're listening to the Brute Strength Podcast. This week, I interview Anders Varner and Theresa Larson, two folks that are starting a new CrossFit specialty course geared towards rehabilitation and movement pattern training. In this show, we go deeper than usual into some kinesiology and biomechanic terms, injury prevention, unilateral work, etc. So some really interesting stuff, as well as their extensive experience in working with military and adaptive athletes. Before we get started, I'm going to invite any of you that are interested to call into a voicemail that I have set up and leave some questions. So then I'm going to play back your question on the podcast, and I'm either going to answer the question myself or I'm going to get one of my guests to help me answer those questions. If you're interested, the number is 801-449-0503. That's 801-449-0503. If you're not already signed up for our newsletter, you're messing up. We're putting out a ton of new videos on tons of different topics, ranging from very technical to very fun and playful. So anything you're interested in functional fitness, competitive community, etc., we got a lot of good stuff for you. So if you're not already signed up for it, go to brutestrengthtraining.com, sign up for that newsletter. That's also where we're going to keep you up to date on any promotions for the holidays, etc. Enjoy the show.
Tommy from Container CrossFit here. I had a quick question about physical therapy. Many times it's often seen as just a way to rehab injuries. In what way do you see the practice of physical therapy becoming much more proactive in the realm of athletics in the next decade?
What up, Tommy? It kind of sounds like Tommy Marquez from Salinas, California. Can't be sure, but it sounds an awful lot like him. Whether this is him or not, if you're not familiar with Tommy Marquez and his EDM playlist and you're into EDM, go to Spotify, type in Tommy Marquez, and just play around in those playlists. He's some people call him a savant of playlisting. So anyway, Tommy, I've got my colleague Sean Pastuch of the Active Life RX with me, and he is actually a chiropractor, but he's got an incredible perspective on human movement and all of these different professions, and I thought he would be the perfect person to help me answer this question. So, Sean, what you got, man?
Well, so first things first, so that we can make it clear that people understand what that all means, what you just said is that, we are practicing chiropractors, meaning our licenses are in chiropractic. But what we're doing is essentially living the answer to the question that Tommy asked. So what we do is not necessarily recognizable as chiropractic or as physical therapy. It's kind of a blend, and it's what we hope people will start doing in the future moving forward. So the question Tommy asked was basically, how will PT, which is currently essentially a rehab field, become more proactive going forward? And the answer, as far as we are concerned, is it will start to seek out a niche market and provide that market with what they need and what they expect, as opposed to what they are already competent at providing. And what I mean by that is that the standard PT office, nationwide, or chiropractic nationwide, they're going to hang their shingle and they're going to say, listen, we can help anybody. If you have, elbow tendonitis, elbow tendinosis, degenerative disc disease, if you're 20, if you're 80, if you're athletic, if you're sedentary, we're the office for you. We take your insurance. We're inexpensive. All of those things that are essentially taken for granted in the space of physical therapy and chiropractic is necessary, right? Great offices, we think and hope, are going to start turning that stuff on their head and start going for quality and becoming the best at what they can be for the single patient who they're looking to work for. And I assume, just because this is an active group of people following this podcast, that Tommy's asking mostly for active populations. So basically our thought process is that PT, chiropractic, all these different fields are going to start to look more and more like training. which means that they're going to be effective before somebody gets hurt. Right now, the PT field, the chiropractic field, as far as we're concerned, is backwards, right? It's when you get hurt, come to us and we'll tell you what's wrong and we'll fix it. Instead of doing everything possible to find out what might go wrong and prevent it, or set up a situation in which somebody who is going to have that injury anyway can be on the shelf for less amount of time because their body's more prepared to deal with the repercussions of the injury that occurs. The way we do that is by understanding better the sports that the athletes we're working with are going to play and coming up with opportunities for them to have programs that make sense for their sports.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I think you answered his question very specifically, because he asked how, is there gonna be a change in physical therapy in terms of being more of a proactive approach. So all of this movement quality practice, this injury prevention practice, all of that kind of stuff. How do you see that specifically being more a part of, say, the average CrossFit gym or Globo gym, or just society in general, using it more in a proactive approach?
Well, so I think the reason why people have not used it in a proactive approach is because nobody wants to come into a physical therapy or chiropractic office, spend their money to leave feeling the same way they felt coming in. Right. And that's always been the hard thing for doctors. Oh, we run a wellness practice. Great. But everybody you see is coming because they're hurting. Right. Or you're just doing the same treatment on everybody, and more power to you for convincing them to come in. So what we do is we basically look at the pain point for somebody, right? What is it that makes it inconvenient for somebody to come see a physical therapist or a chiropractor? Why wouldn't they do it? Why wouldn't a gym start to implement this stuff in their program? And what we looked at is, it's typically a 15 to 20 minute drive out, then a 15 to 20 minute wait for the doctor, then a 30-minute appointment, right? If you're lucky and you're going to somebody who's giving you the time, right? And then a 15 to 20 minute drive home. And when you add that up, you're close to an hour and a half for a visit. And how many times a week do you have to do that? And what does it cost you every time that you come? And is the quality the same every time? And we look at it as it doesn't need to be in person every single time for every single person. We don't need orthopedists to refer to us because they're not necessarily looking for what we're looking for. So by providing people with convenience, with quality of service, and with results at the same time, it goes from being something that we have to market to being something that patients are asking for. And when I say patients, I mean people, right? Anybody who's active is asking for. Professional athletes don't, come off the field and not have access to a trainer every day. And many CrossFitters are working out just as hard as professional athletes. The only difference is means and opportunity.
Right. Love it, man. Thank you, Sean.
You're welcome, Mike.
What's up, guys? I'm here with Anders Varner and Theresa Larson. Thanks so much, guys, for making some time for us.
How's it going?
What's going on?
Going great. So for those of you just tuning in, we just redid this introduction about 5 times. For some reason, it's kind of a tongue twister to get both of their names out. So now we have it. Perfection. Guys, I'm really excited. What's that?
Larson and Varner, that gets you.
Yeah, exactly. Guys, I'm really excited. You two have a lot of really cool things going on, and you're talking about virtual rehabilitation, which is going to be exploding over the next couple years. And so I'm excited to see what you guys have in store and how it's going to apply for gym owners and athletes all across the world. And I want to start out with, one thing that you guys mentioned that is one of your main focus points is something that I think is not being done well in CrossFit gyms across the globe, and that it's something that's really missing in CrossFit gyms, and it's assessment, right? Someone comes in off of the street, and most of the time, if it's a really good gym, they're going to do some kind of on-ramp period, on-ramp class, which could take, one class all the way up to 5 or 6 weeks. And that's on the good side. What I rarely, if ever, see being done is people getting actual testing and individualized programming to any extent. I think it's really difficult to do with a large population. But I think there are some things that gym owners could start utilizing. So I think products and services like you guys are putting together are going to be more and more crucial. So let's start out with what kind of tests are out there right now, and what kind of stuff are y'all going to start providing for people in terms of assessment and correction for CrossFit gyms?
So yeah, we kind of got Theresa used to run her physical therapy practice, Movement RX, out of our gym, San Diego Athletics and Pacific Beach. And just when new athletes come in, we for many years spent all that time. You have your 1 month long, the on ramp, and day 1, we start up squatting. Day 2 is deadlifting. Then there's some sort of Olympic lifting moving. And the process, although it's a month long, it's going to be 8 to 12 classes. It starts to move really quickly. And what we found through the years was just that process is great to initiate somebody to an Olympic lift. Like we can teach somebody how to jump. We can teach somebody how to squat. We teach them the language of Olympic lifting. But what we started to realize is that we were missing the connectivity of movement to movement pattern, and what's the musculature doing? What is the neurological pathway of squatting? Like, can we get somebody to sit down and actually fire their glutes? And it doesn't so much lead to injury when there's great coaching around, but we're really missing the point of how good these movements can be. So you have people that can squat 300, 400 pounds, whatever it is, and they still show up with back pain, and you don't really understand why or how somebody can be that strong and still be dealing with pain. Or maybe it's a shoulder issue and they can do 20, 30, 40 butterfly kipping pull-ups and they look beautiful, but they still have shoulder pain. And why are they missing ranges of motion? What's going on? And through her practice and through, just watching athlete after athlete go through these things, we were able to kind of put together a tiered assessment so that coaches have the ability to really look at somebody's movement patterns and keep them healthy. And if there is an issue, what is the plan to get that person back to 100%?
The reason we developed this assessment was because we found going into CrossFit gyms right away, you're gonna have athletes just getting coached immediately. Even in the functional, the 1 month in-doc or 1 week, whatever they're doing, coaches immediately learn. They have cues, they have coaching, right? They're teaching that person how to move. They're not looking at someone's organic movement coming into the gym. They don't know what their movement maturity is, right? You could have someone who's been a professional athlete for 10 years coming to the gym. You're immediately coaching them, so you've never seen their organic movement though. You've never looked at them, how have you squatted the last 10 years? How have you deadlifted? Because you've already coached them. Right? You've already taught them and you're continuously coaching them each day. So the point of creating the assessment too, and the second problem is you coach them immediately, but you never actually see them on one leg and you actually don't know the cause of like a movement dysfunction. You can say put your hips back, drive your knees out, keep your chin tucked, draw those shoulder blades down. But if they're having issues, where is it coming from? The functional, that in-doc isn't going to tell you that. The 9 functional movements of CrossFit isn't going to tell you that unless you break them down and you get someone on one leg, and you kind of isolate joints and isolate muscle tissue. So that's what we did, is we broke down the 9 functional movements and we put them into categories: hinge, push, pull, squat, carry, and broke them down into bilateral, unilateral movements. Focus on joint by joint to see where the problem of the movement is, versus just saying, oh, you need to, I told you to drive your knees out, I've told you to drive your butt back, you still can't, get to depth, stretch your hips out. Well, how do you know it's their hips, right? How do you know a mobility issue. Maybe they just struggle with motor control. So we're taking a coach's level of intellect and coaching to another. We want to take them to another level of analysis. And what's already out there is Gray Cook's functional movement screen, which is for any trainer. It basically takes you through, I think it's 7 movements, and you look, basically it gives you a score of 21. And if you get a score of 13 or less, you're at high risk for injury. And if you're 14 or more, still not awesome, but you're not at high of a risk for injury. That's really all the FMS says is, are you risk for injury or not? It doesn't still break down joint by joint, right? But it is a decent screening process to say, this person, yep, organically, they're pretty jacked up. We've got a lot of work to do. Maybe we need to work in conjunction with a rehab specialist, or just spend a lot of time on mobility and very, slow strength speed movements. The other one is the selective functional movement screen, which is that next level of Gray Cook's thing, where you have to be, you can be a trainer, but also a practitioner. This is one that I've done both, but this is where it, assesses joint by joint. The thing so I do like this one. However, I feel like with lifters, when you're dealing with people like myself who like being across the gym, I want to be able to assess movements we do in the gym. So that's where we took this assessment, bilateral, unilateral, made it our own, and broke down those movements joint by joint. So coaches can better understand where someone, they look, athletes are so good at compensating, by the way. So if they're so good at compensating, then bilaterally their deadlift's probably going to look fucking awesome, or their squat. But then you get them on one leg, you're doing a split squat or a pistol or, an RDL, and they look awful.
Right. A
disaster. So how do coaches know that? Because if they've never gotten them on one leg, you can't out-coach that. So
I know this is that was a great answer. Thank you. I know it's hard to explain, in-depth assessments, but is there anything that y'all can throw out off the bat that is like just super common in CrossFit gyms that people could start to implement, and then what they could do with those results? Does that question make sense?
I think that, totally. Our level 1 assessment, everything is a bilateral assessment. So doing everything 2 legs, 2 arms. I think we get into a really interesting cultural thing with the PRs. How much weight are you lifting? How fast are you moving it? And when we're standing on 2 legs and we're using a barbell, which just happens to be like the greatest tool ever invented for lifting things, it's really easy, as Theresa was talking about, to compensate for poor movement. And you have this bar sitting on your back, and now we can squat a lot of weight. Well, using a split squat, how about like a single leg deadlift where you're taking these points of contact, and now there's one point of contact with the ground. And that's where we created the level 2 assessment. So we take everything from the bilateral assessment to the unilateral assessment. Can you do a waiter's carry with one arm overhead and actually walk correctly? Like, do you have the midline stability to be able to move with weight overhead, without your feet flying out, without your hips being off? And this stuff is really obvious when you start to do it. So if there's something that coaches can really start to program, I think so often people talk about like, I need to do my accessory work. Well, the accessory work is actually the important piece. You're back squatting 2-3 times a week or whatever. Like, how many people do we know that decided to go download the coolest Russian squat program and then 6 weeks later have a knee problem? Like, the accessory work can also be the main thing that we're working on, like programming single leg deadlifts, programming split squats, programming like anti-rotation, anti-lateral flexion, things that you can put into a program that are considered accessory work because you're not squatting 400 pounds. And those are the things that are going to keep people really healthy, and you're going to find those imbalances. And if coaches can find ways to make accessory work cool and part of the main program, you start to see the culture shift of people slowing down and realizing where those imbalances are. So they're not just fighting through poor squat form, poor deadlift form, and they're actually focusing on like poor movement patterns and how are they going to push their hips back? How are they going to work on things that we never work on, like balance? The imbalance that we have from left to right is unbelievable. And you see it so much when you ask somebody to do a single leg deadlift that it just, they fall over, and that's without dumbbells in their hands. A simple tempo split squat, and you start to see this stuff when people slow down and they can't rush through the movements. It becomes so glaringly obvious that we need to slow people down a little bit, focus on these fundamental movement patterns, and they're just going to make people stronger in the long run. They're just not as sexy up front.
I have a real quick. We stumbled upon a really good way of getting people to buy into this type of work. Jake Hutton and I were working at Southern Utah, and we had programmed a lot of reverse lunges and split squatting and single leg dead, just lots of unilateral work in general. And we couldn't get the guys to really buy into it because of the same reason they don't buy in a CrossFit gym, right? It's not sexy. Yeah. They can't put as much weight, etc. And they were, a lot of guys were having trouble with like 185 pound reverse lunge. And this was a complete accident. Jake's wife was in the gym one day reverse lunging 225 for reps, and all of the football players saw that. And then from then on, like the reverse lunge was sexy, right? Yeah. Like they started throwing around 315, and we just had a lot more excitement and buy-in in the unilateral movements. So for guys,
one of my favorite things to do with any athlete is have them, once they've practiced doing anything on a single leg, you have them max out, and it's like you can do a set of 3 on single leg deadlifts, and like call it, you do your single leg deadlifts 245 for 3. Well, that person probably can't deadlift 490 pounds. You're significantly stronger on one leg than you are on 2. And there's like some bilateral deficits, sciencey things that go into that. But your body can recruit more like neurons in the musculature by focusing on one leg, and you become significantly stronger because of the balance, how much brain power you're putting into moving something on one leg. There's just the neurological piece becomes a huge factor in it.
Right. I would love for y'all to go into a couple things. One, you mentioned bilateral deficit, and then I would also love for y'all to expand on why unilateral work is so good for A, strength, B, injury prevention, etc.
So that's a good question. So the bilateral, one of the sexy buy-ins I use, Mike, for this is that bilateral deficit concept. Why single leg work is so great, because you can mention to the athlete, you can get them on one leg and you can do these RDLs without even weight, right? With their shoes off, no socks on, and look at their balance and see how hard their feet work. But the science shows you're going to dump 25% more power if you can't balance on one leg compared to the other. And there's usually and that's just for 10 seconds, right? We're looking at eyes closed 10 seconds, balance, eyes closed, or eyes open 10 seconds as well. So you should be able to do both. And if you cannot on one leg versus the other, you will definitely be dumping power. And so technically, you're not going to be able to ever reach your optimal lifting potential, right? So the bilateral deficit, I think explaining that in terms of power output helps athletes. It's like, well, you are kick-ass compensators. I just taught a class to 20 CrossFit coaches who compensates and who has a stronger side. All of them raise their hands. We all know we do. And yet, what are we doing to work on it? So when I threw out some numbers of power loss, force dumped, they were like, oh, damn, okay, yeah. Like that's a reason to throw it into my accessory program or supplemental program or warm up. But the other, and also, so when you have a bilateral deficit, that means your nervous system is going to be taxed quicker. You're going to be less efficient. And a bilateral deficit can come it can come down to a stability issue, like a lack of control and balance, and or a mobility issue, which is range of motion. So, those are things that aren't necessarily quick fixes, but they're not going to go away. Right. The purpose for unilateral work is that we're teasing out these bilateral deficits. We're working on the side that is struggling, let's say the not sound side, and we're improving both the mobility in it and or the stability. And then what you have to do after that is put the whole pattern back together, right? If they're working on being an Olympic lifter or power lifter, well, getting them on one leg is good, but then how do you, once you get them to within 10% power output one side to the other, then, okay, how do you apply that to now the barbell and a bilateral movement? Because their brain still knows when I pick up a barbell with both legs, I'm going to shift my weight to my stronger side. That's just what I do. So it's about brain retraining. So you have to, and lifters don't like to hear this, but once you train the unilateral, within that instant, once you train the unilateral movement and you've got a little bit more power output and you're actually firing the muscles that you need to, like your glutes, hamstrings, multifidi, rectors, then you shift them back to the bilateral movement and you take them through the movement pattern without the compensation. Right. But you have to deload that athlete, right? You can't just bump them up to their last heavy weight. Like, take them down to a bar level and see them move the bar and then gradually add weight. So it's like a little bit of a regression, but then ultimately they're going to blow past those PRs they had if they choose to regress just a little bit.
Sometimes you gotta, I heard a fucking awesome analogy the other day. Sometimes you have to slow down to speed up, right? And that definitely applies here.
I think no matter what level the athlete is, like when your everyday Joe comes into the gym, no matter how fast or strong they want to be, as a coach, your goal is to get that person healthier. And doing things on one leg is going to help them in so many more ways than adding 50 pounds to their back squat. Like, getting somebody to move better is going to help their lifestyle. But even when you get into like that elite athlete side of things, like, I don't know if you've seen some of the stuff Marcus Philly's been putting out, like, you have to go back and just rewire your brain to move perfectly. Like, there's a season to get really strong. There's a season to work on your conditioning. And there's a season where you have to work on that neurological piece and work on movement patterns and slinging barbells. And being, back squatting 4 days a week just is not the answer. You got to spend some time doing all of that work that's going to allow you to move better throughout the year.
And to be honest, so going back to the whole, because I get this a lot as a PT, right, a doctor of physical therapy and a coach, like, people come to me and they're like amped to get back into the gym and hitting those PRs, and I'm having them do fucking sideline hip lifts, in a primal pattern or something, and they're like, they feel just so dejected. I'm like, well, in an upright movement position, posturally, like motor control wise, your brain struggles with the pattern rewiring. So we need to isolate that pattern a little bit. And we can do that by getting them on tall kneeling, half kneeling, sideline, supine, prone, whatever. But whatever works for that athlete, to isolate and get them to feel what they're supposed to feel and get their pelvis in a position that is neutral. One of the drills I did with a bunch of dudes the other day was just pelvic circles, pelvic like clock. Basically you lay on your back and you think of an arrow coming out of your junk, shooting straight up towards the sky. But you can imagine that, right?
Absolutely.
And, I'm like, okay, now tilt that arrow towards 12 o'clock, which is your nose, and then tilt that arrow towards your toes. And it was amazing to see how many people are just moving via their low back. Mm-hmm. There's so many other tissues moving in. As simple as that is, it's like, dude, learn how to hula hoop. Like, learn how to move your hips, just your hips, like, why does your low back hurt whenever you go beyond 400 pounds? Well, you can't find neutral. You immediately fall into extension, right? So we need to retrain that without standing up, lay them on their back and do it. And when you kind of start to play into give them a case study of like, this is what your numbers will look like if you can do this correctly, it helps a lot.
And I think the one piece that is really awesome about the assessment process is that coaches get to see, like if you watch somebody walk enough, you will start to see poor movement patterns in very simple things, like taking somebody that is a very strong athlete and then watching them try and crawl quadruped. All of a sudden that becomes very challenging, and you see their back going to extension. So if that's one of your athletes, now we're back squatting, you probably shouldn't be screaming chest up at them.
Right.
Like, we have to be able to teach bracing. We have to be able to teach neutral spine. We have to be able to teach a neutral pelvis. We have to be able to coach these things, not just in the assessment process, but we have to be able to develop that trust from athlete to coach. How are we going to make this person better? How is somebody going to progress and regress movement so that they're able to actually adapt a workout that is going to be positive for that person?
Right.
If you're dealing with overextension issues, we don't need a barbell on someone's back. We need to teach them how to brace. We need to be able to teach neutral spine, and then we can start moving. So there's so many different ways in which we can create a stimulus that's positive instead of throwing somebody into a group class and saying go.
Right. I love this. This is and for everybody listening to this, what's being done in gyms today is still way better than them just sitting on the couch, for sure. But what these guys are doing is teaching you to become an expert coach, which is really fucking cool. We're going to have thousands upon thousands of people becoming some of the best coaches in the world suddenly, right? Because they're going to know so much more.
CrossFit needs, as far as the coaching is, there's a ton of level ones out there. There's a ton of gyms. So as a coach, it used to be you could become a coach, open a gym. There was maybe 10 gyms in your state. Well, now there's thousands, and especially with us in SoCal. So if there's thousands of coaches, how are you going to separate yourself from the masses? And the only way to do that is to be the best in town. And in order to be the best in town, you need to be able to assess people and actually meet them where they're at. Like, the athletes need to be able to help themselves, but as coaches, we need to be able to look at people and understand how to treat people better and get them in a position where they're going to succeed. The idea that someone can walk into the gym, learn a power clean in a week, and now all of a sudden we're excited about their PR 2 months later, that's not coaching anymore. Like, we should be able to teach jumping patterns. We should be able to teach a hinge pattern. We should be able to teach movement patterns and then put these exercises on top of movement patterns.
Right. And it's not because the person walking off the street knows what an assessment is or a correction or any of that, nor do they care, but they're going to want to feel good, and they're going to go to the place that makes them feel the best. So having more tools in your toolbox to make them feel good is going to be a good business move down the line, is what I hear you saying.
Yeah, the business model, the business approach to it for coaches is great, because it just, one, their level of expertise, like you said, is going to go up. And the cool thing, CrossFit's been very receptive. Many CrossFit coaches have been very receptive. Personal trainers, I'd love to get as many personal trainers in a 24-hour Equinox interested too, instead of looking in the mirror. But I hope they're listening.
There were two of them, and they just signed off, so thanks.
Sweet. No, but what I wanted to say about the assessment, it is a tool for the toolbox. It gives a coach a better idea of that athlete's movement maturity walking into the gym day one. Without coaching, they want to show them the movement, then the athlete does the movement. Can they cognitively see the movement, hear it, and do it, right? There's that ability to just pay attention. And then, oh yeah, I've done a deadlift before, and their deadlift looks horrendous. It gives us an idea. All right, well, yeah, we're gonna need some work on all your pulling movements. In your head, you're thinking, all right, we're gonna have to work a lot on your pulling movements. Oh God, one leg. Okay, yeah, we're gonna have to really work on that right side. Squat looks good, maybe. Pressing looks good. Unilateral, bilateral. So it gives you kind of that. If you know a hinge, they struggle with a hinge, well, what other lifts can that relate to? But then the other component to this, which is cool, we just talked about tier one, which bilateral, unilateral, right? Those two levels. Level 1 is bilateral, level 2. We added a component to our assessment which goes into the tier 2, which is joint by joint, right? So just like if someone wants to know, God, your ankle, like your right foot turns out a lot, like you are going to be dumping power because that limited ankle. But how do I know it's an ankle? So through this assessment, we've given people tools to assess the ankle to figure out, is it mobility, is it stability? That hip, is it mobility, is it stability? So then you can say, all right, this whole movement pattern of getting on one leg or hinging on one leg, hinging on both legs, it struggles, but their right ankle mobility blows. They don't have full ankle mobility. That's something we got to work on in conjunction with rewiring this movement pattern. So it just gives coaches more tools to help the athlete in front of them. And then, maybe that person is just a disaster motor-wise. They're gonna have to be using a lot more cues for that person initially. Maybe they learn really quickly. Maybe they pick up on cues really quickly. But it gives a coach an ability to say, hey, Anders or Theresa, like, you got some ankle work to do based on this test. I want you to do this ankle mobility drill, and I want you to work on getting on one leg throughout the day. And then when you come into the gym, maybe do a little bit of that work beforehand too. I'll probably throw it into some of the warm-ups. Some of these supplemental drills, these tests can be thrown into a warm-up, which is awesome. So
I love it. And guys, she's talked about the joint by joint approach a few times. If you haven't read The Joint by Joint Approach by Mike Boyle, that's a great book. I highly recommend it, and it'll kind of expand a little bit on what she's talking about. I don't know if you were referencing that exact thing, but
we spend a lot of time learning from that guy. He's pretty smart.
Yeah.
I did not. Yeah. So I don't know Mike Boyle personally, but I've gotten a lot of my coaching from Kelly Starrett, Gray Cook, Gary Gray. So I've taken a lot of the joint by joint stuff based on what I've learned from those thought leaders.
Yeah, I've heard Gray Cook expand on the joint by joint quite a bit.
Yeah.
I went and did the certified functional strength coach this summer, and it was really good.
Nice. Love it. Okay, let's move on a little bit, guys. I want to, one of your biggest ventures is working with some different populations. And so I want to talk about the military for a little bit, and then maybe adaptive athletes for a little bit. Theresa, I know that you've worked with the military pretty extensively, and you were a Marine, you said?
Yes, I was a Marine Corps officer for 4 years.
Awesome. What kind of unique issues do you think these folks have as opposed to your general population, CrossFitters, et cetera?
We're special.
Very special.
Say more mentally than physically.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a really long podcast.
Yeah. No. Primarily, I was in the Marine Corps. I do have friends from all different services. My older brother just moved to the Coast Guard as a pilot. Better deployments. They go to Fiji and Costa Rica versus Afghanistan. I would say that's way better. But this population is like a small melting pot of our society. So if you look at regular society, runs on little sleep, sympathetic overdrive, they don't slow down, right? People are working 8-9 hours a day, very little time off in the United States. People don't take vacations often. You look at the military, it's just heightened. So these guys are on sympathetic overdrive constantly. As a young lieutenant and platoon commander, I worked 14, 15 hours a day, slept 4 hours a night, would train 2 hours a day, or more. Physically, you're constantly in sympathetic overdrive, and you're in a job where many of us are in, there's actual threats. You're training for war.
Right.
That is what you do when you're a Marine. You train for war. I was a saw gunner when I was at the officer candidate school, and had to carry 2 weapons on me when I was deployed to Fallujah. You're constantly you got to be prepared for threat. So there's even more of a stress component to your life. And So with that being said, because your focus is on war, the focus when you go train isn't on proper movement patterns. It's just get this shit done and get out, right? Just do your push-ups, do your pull-ups, run really fast and get the hell out. Like move on. And there's little training on like, how do you calm down the parasympathetic nervous system? Like how do you meditate and do proper breath work? So there's little focus on the physical, there's physical standards, but little focus on movement patterns and like building these athletes up with good skills, movement-wise. And then there's very little skills on keeping the mental health of these soldiers and Marines, in good standing. So that is what, as a Marine and as in my experience. So I got out in 2007. So in my experience, like going to sick call or going, if I was hurt, you just suck it up. You don't want to, if you're struggling with something mentally, then don't say anything because people will see you as weak. There still is very much of a stigma like that, but I think there's a lot more education these days as to if you're hurt, go get help right away. If you have a mental condition, there's therapists you can see on base that won't report to your unit. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I think Marine One Service or Military One Service is one of them, or I think it's Marine One or Military One. Don't quote me on that. But but there happens to be the interesting thing is there's a lot of orthopedic injuries that come out of the military. I mean, 80% of those who are discharged are on disability. I think with Special Forces, it's 100%. And,
Jesus.
And so, 100%.
What are the biggest causes of that? What in their training or their job are the leading causes of that, in your opinion?
Well, special operations. I mean, they're technically in an overtrained state their entire service. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, if you think about it, BUDS. Once you're done with BUDS, you go operational. I mean, BUDS if you don't get injured in BUDS, you're probably doing something wrong. Like everyone is injured when you come out of BUDS because it's just no sleep, constant loading, training, all shapes and sizes, carrying boats that are over 200 pounds. Like you're constantly in an overtrained state and sympathetic state. Your tissues are going to break down. It's just who is mentally fit enough to deal with that breakdown.
Sure.
And whose bodies are physically capable of breaking down less and recovering faster.
Right.
So it's usually ankle issues. So I work with a couple of SEALs who've had over 6 ankle fractures. I've had to work through that. Back pain, just not insidious, but just back pain from hip levels being different for so long, right? Old herniated discs, mm-hmm. And then shoulder, so slap tears, labral tears.
Right. So if you had to give an entire group, I don't know all of the terms. I don't know, squadron or anything like that. If you had to give an entire group, say like more basic military, some corrective exercises or injury preventative exercises, what would those be?
So that's a good question. I would definitely start with the low back. I would take a big group. So I'd start with the low back and I'd start teaching them. Basically, I would do a couple assessments on them. Can they hinge, right? Mm-hmm. Can they squat? Can they do those correctly, keeping their heels on the ground? Can they load their hips? And then I would take them through some mobility drills, because, to be honest, many of these guys and gals are super stiff. It's usually not lack of stability, even though that usually comes with, once you build the mobility, you need to build the stability. These guys have never worked on mobility, many very limited if they have. And so I'd do some hip flexor / posterior chain work, right? Oftentimes when you release the hip flexors, your glutes start working. So just simple stuff like that, mm-hmm. where I get them actually teaching them really simple posterior chain flossing of their glutes, hamstrings, hip flexor opening that they can do when they're, in theater and they're in they're sleeping with 50 of their best friends and they don't have a rig to tie a band to, right? So I would teach them so basically hips, hip flexors. I'd focus on hip flexors, glutes, hamstrings, and then I'd also work on their feet. So I'd have them, because feet very much affect
The whole chain.
They could very much affect your hips. So if you have weak hips, you're going to have weak feet. If you have restricted feet, you're going to have weak hips. They go together.
What do you mean restricted feet?
Missing ankle mobility.
Oh,
so
okay.
If you have missing ankle dorsiflexion, then you are going to have missing hip extension when you walk. You're going to have missing hip flexion when you squat. So because of that shitty ankle, your hip's going to be, becoming limited because of that missing ankle. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So it's more in the ankle than in the foot, or is there, or are you also talking about foot musculature?
So that's the next thing is if you have weak foot musculature, if you have flat feet, you've never really worked on your feet, you've developed flat feet, and you're always in this pronated state, you need to be pronated, supinated when you walk. You need to be supinated for the most part, active midfoot when you lift, right? It shouldn't be pronated, which is a flat foot. Like that flat foot, try to squeeze your ass with a flat foot. Everybody do it right now. Flat feet, squeeze your ass. Now active foot, squeeze your ass. Like it's easier. You probably felt it. Did you feel it, Mike?
I'm literally over here squeezing my butt, but I was born with flat feet, so I'm thinking, I'm like, what's going on with me? Am I just fucked?
Try this. If you're standing, gently activate your feet. Gently lift your arches up, like you're gonna pick, something off the ground with your toes as best you can.
Yep.
Now squeeze your butt.
Okay.
Now just let your feet cave in and let them be relaxed. Now squeeze your butt.
Yep. Got it.
There's a difference.
Right.
So you hang out in, high heel boots, which they give these guys boots that, that takes the sensory aspect to your feet away because you're in these thick soled boots. And on top of that, you give them, it creates missing ankle dorsiflexion, right? Or plantar flexion, missing ankle mobility, weak feet over time, then your hips definitely will be weak over time. Therefore, the hips that protect the low back, the low back's going to hate you and start to have pain because the hips are weak, because the feet are weak. So does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So those are where I'd focus, is hips don't lie and the feet, which protect the low back, which is, the area that you don't really want to fuck with the spine. So you got to start, and every movement is initiated, unless you're a worm, from your feet or hips.
From the ground up, right.
That analogy. Unless you're a crawling creature, your movement is going to be initiated from your ankles and hips. So that's where I would focus with these tactical athletes. Oh, and by the way, I'd throw in, the fact that I'd teach them how to breathe. I would teach them how to literally not breathe for performance, right? That can come next. That could be like level 2. Breathe for like calming, right? We know that 3 minutes of breath work a day can decrease blood cortisol levels by 32%. Like if you do that, and that blood cortisol levels are, anything over 32 micrograms per deciliter is not awesome. So people, if you don't know what your cortisol levels are, you probably want to go check them out. Not to scare people, but like, hey, we live in a sympathetic state, and the military is just, you heighten that. So let's teach these guys how to mentally find, and gals, how to mentally find a parasympathetic state so they can get good sleep, so they can make better decisions, so they don't fucking go, batshit crazy when they get off deployment.
Right. Well, look, my audience is very primed for that. We probably talk about mindfulness or breath work in about every episode now, so I'm glad we hit on that just now. Love
nice.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, we're a believer in that as well.
Very cool. Yeah, I love all of that about the foot. That's very interesting. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Oh, the ankles they affect everything. And so I could spend probably a week-long course just on the ankles and how it affects different lifts, mobility, stability, all the dimensions to it. but that'll be for a later podcast.
Yeah,
Awesome.
the ankle show. The ankle show.
The ankle show.
The
Yeah,
ankle
you just start your own podcast, the ankle show.
Yeah.
It's all
Okay.
about the ankle.
This one, I get mixed reactions when I ask this question, and if you don't have an answer, we can come back to it. But what do you think is the worst piece of common advice being given out currently in regards to rehabilitation, correcting movement patterns, etc.?
I'll take this one, Anders.
Got it.
Worst piece of advice is rest and ice.
No more rice, huh?
To be honest. Yeah, rice. Fuck rice. So it's resting and icing is so standard, and there are athletes that are in an overtrained state, and they maybe need to rest. They need to rest from that point. Their body needs to, their resting heart rate needs to go down. They need to allow themselves more recovery time, etc. But it's very common. You go to a rehabilitation specialist and they say stop. Well, your squatting hurts your knee, so stop squatting. And they give you ice to put on that knee, right? Like make sure you ice every day and don't squat. Versus teaching them actually looking at their squat, assessing their squat. What do they need to have a good squat? If they're an Olympic weightlifter, it's going to be a little bit different than a power lifter. And so squatting is extremely therapeutic, and you might be able to fix it pretty quickly without having them just rest. Let's say they are hurting with an upright torso squat, well then have them do it in a manner that's like supine on their back or in a half kneeling, right? Where it's not causing a knee issue, but they're getting to recruit the muscles they need to recruit, because most likely they're not using their ass enough and they're too quad driven or something of that sort. But then the advice of icing is like, well, what's the point of icing if this person's had knee pain for over 3 months? It's chronic. There's no inflammation anymore. Why are we icing? Well, if it's to decrease inflammation, then you're an idiot. Like, don't ice. Like, you don't, even if it's 2 to 3 weeks out, icing. We want, inflammation is there. If you think about it, we're created to have inflammation in our body to help heal tissue. Inflammation brings white blood cells, it brings proteoglycans, it brings all these important nutrients to an area. So what ice does is just stops that process. And it makes you feel better for sure, but it's like, well, that's not what's going to help the healing process. What's going to help the healing process is maybe applying a little bit of heat, and or not necessarily to a burn, right? Don't put heat on a burn or an open wound, but heat on an inflamed area can help speed up the inflammatory process, and or compression and elevation.
So the compression and elevation are still good. No more
Yes.
RI.
Yes.
Got it.
Those are good for like inflammatory states, which can,
Got it.
usually inflammation will last anywhere from, the day of assault of injury to like 14 to 18 days. That's it. And then after that, it'll start to go away. That's an acute stage. Sometimes in the settled stage, if it's like deep in the joint, you'll get what we call joint effusion. But icing isn't going to help that go away, right? So compression and elevation is still the best thing for an injury up to 3 months. And then if there's still problems up to 3 months, well, shoot, then you got to start considering a lot of movement pattern retraining, maybe desensitization work, right? So
I'm going to give you guys, I'm going to throw y'all 2 bones, and you can just take this. This is free. I think y'all go hashtag fuck rice, hashtag hot knees, and that's just part of kind of your movement culture, right? Your lifestyle brand, if you will.
Hot knees, fuck rice.
I think I might rock a fuck rice shirt for a couple days.
Totally.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Bone.
Absolutely. So is there, because I've kind of been skirting around this topic for the last 3 or 4 years, this rice topic. And I've gotten pretty much the same answer from most people I've asked as you just gave, but is there no
or is the only application for ice for pain reduction, and that's it?
Yeah. So if I only recommend ice for pain, there is the uncommon instance, let's say with an adaptive athlete, someone who's got a severe injury, where maybe there is a burn involved, right? There's a burn involved, or open wound keeps reopening. I would apply ice there, just because it's not going to help with the healing process. It's just going to help with cooling the tissue down. Usually with a wound, initial wound, there's some heat that's involved there.
Yep.
And that heat can be super uncomfortable. For someone who's been injured constantly, I would say ice within the first 48 hours, and then strict to just compression and elevation.
And why
yes,
the first 48 hours? What's different in those 48 hours versus the rest? What what's the what is the reason to use that?
Because that is good question. That is when you have the most amount. So the first 48 hours is when you're going to have the most amount of inflammation happen, and pain's going to happen. I mean, the tissue's open, it's weak. There's a lot of blood flow to that area. It's going to be affecting the surrounding tissues. So like in anterior, if you like cut open the front of your knee, or really like injured your MCL, you're going to have a shit ton of swelling, and it's going to be painful, most likely, to walk. So that first 40 hours, you're going to get the most amount of inflammation and discomfort. And so instead of telling someone to take NSAIDs, something that's going to maybe affect their liver over time, right? Like a pill, like I would have them use ice. So in that first 48 hours it's just because it's the most painful.
It's more
time.
painful. Okay, got it.
Yeah,
I
and
love
that's
that.
it. And then after that, it's like, all right, well, we're still dealing with the inflammation. You've slowed it down a little bit, but now the pain is better. The tissue is getting out of that acute phase. So remember, the acute phase goes from day 1 to day 7, or 7 to 14, depending on the severity of the tissue. So if you look up, literally, if you Google tissue healing time, you'll see that you need to respect the acute stage of healing time. But that first 48 hours of pain, instead of popping a bunch of pills, just use ice. And then after that, go to compression, elevation, heat.
Got it. Awesome. I finally cleared it up.
Good.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
There's lots of good stuff. I mean, there is some good information on heat and ice if you look from a performance, not just rehabilitation, but from a performance standpoint. I mean, there's a bunch of articles on icing, heat, going back and forth, more for tissue recovery time. So like if I have some people going, like I had some Paralympians who had back-to-back meets, some CrossFit athletes back-to-back competitions, ice baths can be a great way to just calm the temperature of the body down quickly, right? And they don't have to do maybe more than 3 minutes. They get out, their tissue can so calming the heat down so they can get better prepared for that next meet. Right. And they're not still in that like sympathetic, high heat, still burning fuel state.
Right.
So that's when I would use ice.
Awesome.
And sometimes for recovery, people like to switch like heat and ice. What's his name? The Dutch guy, Wim Hof.
Wim Hof.
Yep.
Wim Hof. So I enjoy his breathing practice, and he's got some good information on his website about icing himself. I think he even has
his whole body for days at a time.
Yeah. The benefits of appropriate breathing, and then popping yourself into an ice bath for 3 minutes or longer.
I love
He's got
that.
some good information on heat and ice too. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I've done. I don't have a ton of experience with this stuff, but I've practiced it probably a dozen or so times, and a buddy of mine and I would go occasionally in the ocean right outside of Santa Cruz when it was like December, and we would do some Wim Hof and then hop in, and it was incredible the effect it had. Like our bodies felt so warm, albeit for only like 30 or 40 seconds before we were, miserable. But it's crazy the power that the breath has.
Yeah. And you think about it, so I've done something similar. I was up in Bodega Bay with my brothers, and they're like twice. So I'm 6'1", but they're like 6'8", huge guys. And so I was like, all right, you guys, we're going to jump in this ice cold water that I secretly did the Wim Hof before. And then we jumped in, and just you could see the freaking out component to the bodies. It's like we're all there. You want to freak out, but then you realize I have this tool. I can use my breath to calm my body down and create warmth. And by the way, I already created some warmth in my body. Like, that's what we need to teach military members, right? You can literally calm your body down and brain down to make better decisions if you learn how to breathe.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Okay,
that is a freaky 20 minutes of your life when you get into it. The whole body starts tingling.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, let's talk about adaptive athletes for a second and this new venture that you guys have coming out. First off, what is your experience working with adaptive athletes, and kind of what gives you the credibility to work with this special population?
So I would say 3.5-ish, maybe 4 years ago, I got a terrible call from one of our coaches. Theresa was actually in the gym practicing that day, and our noon class went off as scheduled. Everything was good. I got a phone call that one of our athletes had a stroke in the gym, and he was 27 years old. There was seemingly healthy. Next thing you know, he was getting taken away in an ambulance and spent the night with him in the hospital. Like, they had no real reason why it happened and all that good stuff. Like, there's just no answers at the time. And he kind of looked at me and didn't really know what to do. And I just said, well, we should probably start training, like, once you get out of here. Clearly not we're taking like full-on CrossFit classes and intensity and all that, but I had no experience. I have no idea why I said it, but we just started doing a bunch of personal training together and started with some really basic things. And that experience just really turned me on to how the brain and the body can connect with each other, and how we can take these movement principles and break down the movements so that we can rewire how the brain and the body connect to each other, and how we can break down a squat to get somebody that's having really a lot of neurological trouble using one side of their body. But we can still teach that movement pattern. We can still break down these bigger movements into little pieces so that we can slowly rewire how the body works. And from there, it just became this like kind of obsession of learning on a much deeper level how the body and the brain connect together, and how we're able to move through the world, and really give these people hope that, maybe not hope, because some of them are so badass that you wouldn't even believe it, but we can give them the ability and the strength and the confidence in themselves that they can go and do the things that they always wanted to do. And since then, we've really, Theresa's helped a ton of people, but people recovering from surgeries, back surgeries. We coach a wheelchair basketball team out here, and it's incredibly rewarding. But at the same time, like, there's no better group to learn from than watching people that are really missing basic functioning like movement patterns, but training their body to be able to do it. I have Paralympic cyclists that we work with now, and we started literally in a tall kneeling squat position, and now we're able to do a version of goblet squats to get him, basically to parallel. And it's just a massive difference in a very short amount of time when you start breaking these movements down, and you can just slowly train the body and the brain to fire the way it's supposed to.
Right. It's almost like
Yeah.
this population seems to be one of the most hopeful, some of the most hopeful people on the planet. So you're matching that hope and drive with the proper education and training, right?
Yes. So exactly. Working with an adaptive population, we're basically referring to someone with a permanent wound, someone whose movement pattern will never change. So where their movement will never be the same. Mm-hmm. So like your athlete who is a Paralympic biker, cyclist, he has dropped foot. He will never be able, drop foot meaning his ankle will never be able to gain dorsiflexion or have stability there because he had severe nerve damage. Mm-hmm. So, but he has a hip, his hip works. So how do we work? He wears an orthotic called a KFO, knee, ankle, foot orthotic. So how do we get him to utilize that KFO and squat? But his optimal squat will never look the same as ours. It'll be different. But that's his new optimal. We want to get him as optimal as possible, applying movement principles of spine first, quarter extremity movement and good joint stability. He will always compensate a little bit. That's because of his permanent wound. And I think that's why I got into the adaptive population 4 years ago, right after I got out of PT school. I started working with Kelly Starrett with Mobility WOD, but I was also at a really big gym in San Diego, a very competitive gym. And I was in a class of 40 people, and I was kind of getting tired of the fact that I wasn't really being coached, and I was ready to move on. But I noticed because there were so many people in the class with one coach. But I saw a fellow Marine who had bilateral above the knee prosthetics on, J legs, like the wrong prosthetic to be wearing when you're lifting weights, right? Because a J leg doesn't have much surface area. And I just kind of saw him being pushed to the corner, like the coach not paying any attention to him when clearly he needed to be paid attention to. Like he was completely rainbow back, lifting heavy weight. And it was like the coach didn't really know what to do with him. And I went over to him. As I went over to him, the coach was like, "Oh yeah, Teresa, you figure it out." I was like, "I'm not even a fucking coach here." Okay. So I was like, "Hey, were you in the service?" "Yeah, I'm Marine." "Okay, me too. Let's go over to the wall here. Let's give you a third point of contact. You're wearing prosthetics that don't have a lot of surface area. Let's just get you against the wall. Let's deload the bar a little bit and have you start from top down, just keeping your back as straight as possible, and widen your stance a little bit." And I really, based on the issues I had in the service, I experienced trauma, and I didn't have someone pay attention to me the way I needed. And so I was like, I'm fucking going to pay attention to these guys, and I'm not going to put them in a corner and be like, someone else figure it out.
Right.
Because, he needed to be paid attention to. He can't afford to have more back pain. He's got 2 missing legs. He's still dealing with phantom limb pain and the fact that he can feel his legs every day and this trauma. Jeez. So I kind of made it part of my life work to pay attention to these guys and gals. And since then, created a class, an adaptive athlete class down at Fathom CrossFit, and then here at my headquarters. And we work with anywhere from someone with severe mental wounds, such as sexual assault, to vestibular dysfunction, to mild traumatic brain injuries, to spinal cord injury. And it's been, I don't know, I have a neurotherapist, but I'm not treating traumatic brain injury and spinal cord injury every day. I'm just helping them when they get out of rehab. What do they do in the gym? I'm giving them an answer. I'm giving them information on, hey, you guys can deadlift too. Spinal cord injury, you're not going to walk again, but you can hinge, and we need to teach you how to hinge. Mild TBI, you have trouble with balancing, we're going to teach you how to balance and tools you can use to help you balance. And what comes out of it is that these guys are so appreciative. It's like every day you coach them, they're so thankful that you took the time to care. Whereas normally in a gym, people come and go, I've lost weight, I feel better, thanks coach. Or wow, I PR'd my squat. All good things, right? But right. I really love impacting. Movement is our life. And when people don't value that until they're injured. And these guys had a traumatic injury, which is it's 4% of the population. they get injured, the traumatic piece, from a car accident, war, whatever, their deck of cards has changed. They have to adapt or they won't survive.
Mm-hmm.
And so how can I, as a coach with my knowledge base, I'm not going to let that go. I feel like it's my responsibility to care, because that's what I didn't get. And I want to be able to show people what I didn't get.
Right.
Give people what I didn't get.
That is awesome. So let's wrap it up, but can you tell people about your upcoming seminar that you guys are putting together, and where they can find out more about that?
Yes. So we have a new course. It's the CrossFit. It's a specialty course on the adaptive athlete. It will be, so it's up on the main site now. If you look up CrossFit specialty course, adaptive athletes there. We are in the middle of getting dates together for early 2017. So they're not officially up yet. So keep checking the main site, or movement-rx.com is another, that's my company, my like brick and mortar company website, where you'll be able to look under seminars and see what's coming up. So we're ideally going to start teaching end of January throughout the entire year. And it's a 2-day course. We're going to travel the country doing this. So
hell yeah. Anders, anything else from you, anywhere they can keep up with what you've got going on and everything?
Yeah, so Theresa and I recently launched the low back fix. And what we've done is kind of taken this assessment piece and what are the 5 pieces that people with low back pain suffer from. Taking the assessment, made it so people can do it at home, do it in any gym. They don't need to go to a CrossFit gym. They can go anywhere. Can you touch your toes? What does it look like when you rotate? Can you sit down and stand up properly? And from that assessment, we have put together this online rehabilitation piece to get you moving properly, and given people a plan to recover from the injury, recover from whatever's happening, why it's happening, combining physical therapy, combining mobility, stability piece, and then giving people a strength conditioning plan to train the brain, train the body to actually move well, gain the strength, balance, some conditioning pieces as you start to progress through the program, and then a movement prescription going forward that is helping people specifically with that. But just taking that assessment and applying it to as many people as possible so we can help people. So if you go to thelowbackfix.com, there's a ton of information up, website, program,
free ebook,
ebooks, videos, all the things to guide people down a path to get them moving well and healthy.
Hell yeah. How about social media? Where can people find you?
So you can find us on at thelowbackfix.com.
Yep.
Or sorry,
.com.
at thelowbackfix. That's our Instagram handle and Facebook, and then at movement-rx is Facebook and Instagram for us. So.
Yep. And I'm Anders Varner on Instagram and on Facebook as well.
Yeah. And
keep it simple.
Theresa
Just the
Larson.
names.
Awesome, guys.
Hot knees.
Hot knees, fuck rights.
Hot knees.
That's right.
Hey, like I said, I scooped up that domain already, so if y'all don't start using that hashtag, I'm going to scoop that one up too. All right, guys, this has been phenomenal. Thank y'all so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right.